After 8 seasons and 10 years on the air, Game of Thrones came to a surprising and controversial end. We're here to rank its major characters' endings from worst to best. And boy, there are some doozies. Introduced in the 3rd season as a slave, Missandei is quickly welcomed into Daenerys Targaryen's camp as a free woman. The two soon become close friends and confidants, rarely leaving each other's side throughout much of the series. However, in the show's final season, when Daenerys' ships are attacked, Missandei is captured by the allied forces of Euron Greyjoy and Cersei Lannister. When Daenerys tries to save her friend, the duo beheads Missandei in front of the desperate Dragon Queen. Missandei's death is tragic, and her last word proves her loyalty to Daenerys with gutting finality. Dracarys. Although Missandei using Daenerys' catchphrase was powerful, her death was in poor taste. One of the show's few characters of color, Missandei was a thoughtful, layered character who was needlessly killed off simply to motivate Daenerys in the show's final episodes. One of the show's most sinister villains, Cersei Lannister, looms large over Game of Thrones, from her affair with her twin brother Jaime to her abject cruelty towards her enemies. One would think that a complex character like Cersei would get an ending befitting her impressive legacy, but unfortunately that doesn't come to pass. In the final season, Cersei ends up in the line of fire when Daenerys arrives at King's Landing, dragon blazing. As Cersei's home base collapses in rubble, the typically inscrutable queen is alone until her brother Jaime arrives. The two die together, crushed under falling debris as they attempt to escape. This ending proved to be pretty disappointing for fans who expected the ruthless queen to go out in a more dramatic fashion. Over the course of the series, Jaime Lannister becomes one of the show's most complex characters. After beginning the series loyal to Cersei, Jaime eventually turns away from his sister, deciding to help his brother Tyrion and Daenerys instead. But at the end of the series, Jaime returns to Cersei, right after finally consummating his slow burn relationship with Brienne of Tarth. Ultimately, Jaime rejects his honorable path to die alongside Cersei in the Red Keep. Though it makes poetic sense that the duo would leave the world together, it felt as though Jaime's anticlimactic ending undermined many seasons of impressive character growth. As one of the most popular and beloved characters on the small screen, many fans fully expected Daenerys, the Mother of Dragons, to take the Iron Throne by the end of the series. Unfortunately, Daenerys had a far different fate waiting for her. Upon conquering King's Landing, Daenerys loses control of her emotions and lays waste to the city, killing countless innocent civilians. Even her closest allies realize she must be stopped. Before she can take the Iron Throne, Daenerys' lover Jon Snow kills his queen for the good of the realm. In the wake of her death, her last remaining dragon, Drogon, torches the throne and carries his mother away. Daenerys' ending is certainly dramatic, but her sudden descent into madness and rushed death tarnish her character's otherwise incredible story. From the very first scene of Game of Thrones, viewers are made aware that despite rampant infighting within the Seven Kingdoms, the realm has a bigger threat looming: the ancient and mysterious beings known as White Walkers. Though the Night's Watch guards the northern wall to try and protect Westeros from what lies beyond, the White Walkers start heading south in the show's 2nd season. When the show's heroes finally face off against the Night King and his army, all hope seems lost. However, just when the humans have all but given up, Arya Stark leaps from the darkness and kills the Night King once and for all. While this makes for an epic moment, it's also weirdly disappointing. After years of mystery surrounding the Night King, his entire storyline ends in seconds. The Night King was set up as a major villain, but ultimately the show disposes of him like a minor baddie. It's hard not to feel cheated out of a potentially gripping story about this intriguing character. Few of Game of Thrones' conniving characters had as much potential as Margaery Tyrell, an unparalleled strategist who was also the prize beauty of the wealthy House Tyrell. After a short-lived marriage to Renly Baratheon, Margaery shifts her allegiances to the Lannister family in King's Landing. Before long, Margaery is married to the sadistic Joffrey Baratheon, but when he is assassinated at their wedding, she ends up serving as queen to his sweet younger brother, Tommen. Unfortunately for Margaery, however, she makes an enemy of Cersei almost immediately thanks to her beauty and quick mind. When Cersei vindictively blows up the Sept of Baelor before she can be tried for her various crimes, Margaery is among her many victims. Although Margaery realizes what's happening before Cersei's plan is executed, she's unable to escape in time, bringing her fascinating story to an abrupt and disappointing conclusion. After being paralyzed by Jaime Lannister in the show's first episode, Bran Stark gradually grows into someone entirely new, taking on the mantle of the omniscient Three-Eyed Raven. When Westeros needs to choose a new king in the wake of Daenerys' death, Tyrion makes a surprising case for Bran to take the throne, despite previous assertions from Bran that he has no political ambitions for himself.
I can never be lord of anything. I'm the Three-Eyed Raven.
Bran is somehow chosen as the next king of Westeros. The reasons that put him on the throne are nonsensical at best, bringing the series' long struggle for the Iron Throne to a frustrating and unsatisfying conclusion. A master of gossip and intrigue, Varys spends the series frequently teaming up with fellow strategists like Peter Littlefinger Baelish and Tyrion to advance his political career and the cause of peace in Westeros. For most of the show, there's rarely any doubt that Varys always has a brilliant plan up his sleeve. Unfortunately, Varys' potential is wildly squandered by the time the show draws to a close. After doing very little in the last 2 seasons, he acts completely out of character when he stages an open, obvious coup against Daenerys. Unsurprisingly, his scheme is uncovered, and Daenerys executes him for treason, resulting in an utterly unsatisfying ending for one of the show's most intriguing characters. Introduced as a perpetually frightened brother of the Night's Watch, Samwell Tarly eventually proves himself in battle, and spends time explaining his knowledge at the Citadel. Though Sam finds himself rejected by his noble family, his growth as a character is pretty impressive. At the conclusion of Game of Thrones, Sam is shown wearing Maester's robes, indicating he is now one of the intellectual elite. It turns out he has been named the Grand Maester for King Bran. He also writes a book that chronicles the dramatic events of the series, and settles down with Gilly and Sam Jr., their young son. Sam's ending might be unusually neat and tidy for Game of Thrones, but he deserves a happy ending. Theon Greyjoy begins Game of Thrones as the insecure ward of the Stark family, who overtakes Winterfell the second the family departs. However, Theon ends up suffering for his crimes when he's captured by the Bolton clan and tortured by Roose Bolton's sadistic son, Ramsay. Before long, Theon has lost his grasp on his former identity, referring to himself only as Reek. Reek endures horrific torture, but eventually Theon's bravery returns, as does his loyalty to the Stark family. After helping Sansa Stark escape Ramsay's captivity, Theon volunteers to personally guard Bran during the Battle of Winterfell. Ultimately, Theon sacrifices himself to save Bran, providing redemption for one of the show's most complicated and long-suffering characters. From the beginning, it's clear that Jorah Mormont harbors romantic feelings for Daenerys, the young mother of dragons. After meeting Daenerys at her wedding to Dothraki warrior Khal Drogo, the disgraced heir of the Mormont clan pledges his loyalty to his Khaleesi and stands by her side until the bitter end. During the Battle of Winterfell, Jorah tries his best to defend his Khaleesi and gets mortally wounded in the process. Not only does Jorah nobly sacrifice himself for his queen, but he escapes having to see Daenerys abandon her principles during her attack on King's Landing. In a way, this gives Jorah the best ending he could hope for. Sandor the Hound Clegane became a fan favorite early on, thanks to his gruff demeanor, fighting prowess, and secret, sensitive side. His scarred face is courtesy of his brother, Gregor the Mountain Clegane, who shoved Sandor into a fire when they were both young. The Hound doesn't care about much, but he does care about getting revenge on his brother. Eventually, the Hound forms a close bond with Arya Stark. As one of his final acts, he saves her life by convincing her to flee a crumbling King's Landing. But rather than escape with her, the Hound faces off against his brother, who has become an unstoppable killing machine. Ultimately, the Cleganes die together when the Hound flings them both into the flames below, giving him a tragic but poetically fitting ending. A fighter of uncommon skill, dedication, and honor, Brienne of Tarth's refusal to adhere to traditional gender roles often makes her feel like an outsider. Desperate to prove her worth in battle, she eventually allies herself with the Stark family, promising to protect Sansa and Arya as well as she can. Along the way, Brienne also forms an intense bond with Jaime Lannister. He knights Brienne before the Battle of Winterfell, making her the first female knight of the Seven Kingdoms. When they both survive the attack, Jaime and Brienne consummate their relationship. Unfortunately, Jaime ends up abandoning Brienne for Cersei shortly thereafter. Though Brienne is left bereft, the blow is softened when she becomes Lord Commander of the King's Guard, fulfilling her destiny as one of Westeros' most formidable and honorable warriors. Serving as the Stark family's servant, the lovable giant Hodor manages to find emotional nuances with each repetition of his name, which is the only word he is able to say. For a long time, viewers have no idea why Hodor has such a limited vocabulary, until Season 6's The Door reveals his shocking backstory. As Bran gains the knowledge to become the Three-Eyed Raven, who can travel throughout space and time, he encounters a young Hodor, who has a full vocabulary. However, while Bran is in the past, Whites attack the present-day Bran and Hodor. Hodor blocks the Whites behind a door so Bran can escape, while in the past, a young Hodor yells one sentence over and over until it turns into a single word.
On the door! 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 On the
Losing Hodor is heartbreaking, but the revelation of his past is an incredible feat of storytelling. While violent, charming wildling Tormund Giantsbane was initially no big fan of Jon Snow, the two eventually become close friends, fighting alongside one another time and time again. Tormund ends up surviving the battle against the White Walkers as well as the siege of King's Landing. Though his enormous crush on Brienne remains unrequited, Tormund's ending is fitting, with him returning to the far north where he belongs, alongside his sworn brother, Jon Snow. One of Game of Thrones' most emotionally conflicted characters, Jon Snow always wants to do what's right. That instinct leaves him with a hard decision to make when his lover, Daenerys, decimates the city of King's Landing. After talking to Tyrion, Jon realizes he must do the right thing despite his love for Daenerys. As the Dragon Queen reaches the Iron Throne she has fought so hard to win, Jon stabs her in the chest. After Dany's death, Drogon burns the throne and carries Dany away, but Jon still must face justice for his crime. Eventually, it's decided that Jon will be banished from Westeros and return to the north. Though this is painted as punishment, it feels natural for Jon Snow, who never felt at home in the halls of the kings and queens of Westeros. He heads back into the northern wilderness with Tormund and his loyal direwolf Ghost by his side. Born without a prestigious name, Petyr Baelish quickly learned to do anything to gain power. Eventually, the conniving noble known as Littlefinger became a major player within King's Landing, running a brothel and collecting information on the biggest names in Westeros. Though he seemed loyal to Sansa Stark, he readily traded her to Ramsay Bolton when he thought it might gain him power. Once Sansa returns to Winterfell, Littlefinger does his very best to pit sister against sister, attempting to turn Sansa and Arya against one another. Though Littlefinger thinks victory is nigh when Sansa calls for a trial that he assumes is for Arya, she beats him at his own game.
You stand accused of treason. How do you answer these charges? Lord Baelish.
On Sansa's orders, Arya slits his throat, and Littlefinger's death provides an incredibly satisfying ending for this often despicable man. For a show with its fair share of bad guys, few are as repulsive as Ramsay Bolton. In addition to tormenting Theon, Ramsay repeatedly assaulted Sansa Stark and killed her younger brother Rickon just for fun. After he kills Rickon, Ramsay loses the Battle of the Bastards and finds himself at the mercy of the surviving Starks. Bound and helpless in the depths of Winterfell, Ramsay sneers at Sansa until he realizes that he's surrounded by his own snarling dogs. When Ramsay says they'll never hurt him, Sansa points out that Ramsay stopped feeding them days prior in anticipation of winning the battle. He'd been planning to feed the Starks to his pets, as he'd done with other victims in the past. As Sansa leaves him to the same fate he dealt out to so many others, Ramsay's dogs rip him to shreds, putting an end to Game of Thrones' most reprehensible sociopath. Tyrion Lannister goes on a winding journey throughout Game of Thrones, but ends up right where he should be. After facing imprisonment for turning on Daenerys after her siege of King's Landing, Tyrion convinces Jon to assassinate Daenerys for the good of the realm. Despite her allies being furious with him, Tyrion is still brought to the council that will decide the fate of Westeros' monarchy, and actually ends up handpicking the new king. Bran chooses Tyrion to serve as Hand of the King, a job he doesn't initially want after having served as Hand before. But the truth is that pulling the strings behind a leader is where Tyrion's strengths can best be utilized. The last scene of the series sees Tyrion comfortably leading one of Bran's small council meetings, proving that he's exactly where he belongs. After using the faceless assassin skills that she acquired throughout the series to seek revenge against her enemies and defeat the Night King, Arya Stark deserves a break. But with the wars in Westeros drawing to a close and demand dwindling for her hard-won fighting skills, Arya is faced with the daunting decision about what to do with the rest of her life. Ultimately, Arya sets off to explore the world, telling her brothers and sister that she wants to find what's west of Westeros. Armed with her trusty sword, Needle, Arya sets sail to explore the darkest corners of the world, seeking independence outside the contentious borders of the Seven Kingdoms. Arya was always a character who sought her own path in life, so to see her continuing to challenge herself and push boundaries is a rewarding ending for this beloved character. One of the overarching messages of Game of Thrones always seemed to be that the ideal leader of the Seven Kingdoms would have the cunning strategy of Cersei with the honor and trustworthiness of Jon Snow. So it was surprising and a little bit frustrating when Sansa Stark, the character who most embodies both qualities, is overlooked in favor of her brother Bran. However, when Bran becomes king, the shrewd Sansa seizes that opportunity to make an important request.
The North will remain an independent kingdom, as it was for thousands of years.
Bran agrees, and Sansa is rewarded for her efforts. In one of the very last shots of the series, viewers watch as Sansa is crowned the Queen in the North, ensuring that a Stark will remain in Winterfell for years to come. Though she would undoubtedly have been a fair and capable ruler of Westeros, her home in the North is where she truly wants to be, which makes her ending the perfect conclusion to her impressive tale. Olenna Tyrell, the matriarch of the wealthy House Tyrell, who carries the title of Queen of Thorns, is known for always being several steps ahead of everyone else. Her razor wit and even sharper tongue serve her well throughout the series, and her final moments are no exception. After allying herself with Daenerys and her forces, Olenna finds herself outmatched against the Lannister armies as they approach her home of Highgarden, leaving her trapped. Unwilling to violently slay an old woman, Jaime gives her a poisoned glass of wine instead. But Olenna has one last trick up her sleeve. After drinking the poison, Olenna finally reveals to Jaime that she is responsible for the death of his son with Cersei, the illegitimate King Joffrey.
Tell Cersei. I wanted to know it was me.
Even though Jaime technically gets what he wants by taking out one of his biggest enemies, Olenna still manages to come out on top, giving her the best ending in all of Game of Thrones. As showrunner Dan Weiss once put it,
she beats him in the middle of her own death scene.